Hello and welcome to Inside Marvel from ABC News Digital. I'm your host, Walt Hickey. Today we are diving into the epilogue of the huge story that has consumed the Marvel Universe over the course of the entire summer, Secret Empire Omega. Today in studio, I'm joined by Alanna Smith and Tom Brevoort from Marvel.
Hello.
How's it going, y'all?
Good.
Congratulations, books on the shelf.
Whew, on time and in the stores.
We did it.
Whew, out remotely. We've got a number of guests today. We've got Nick Spencer, the man behind the book. How's it going, Nick?
Hey, thanks for having me.
You look calm and relieved.
He's got a lot more sleep.
And then out in LA, I believe, we have Meg Downey. She's a comic book journalist. How's it going, Meg?
Hi.
All right.
Great.
So we have a huge issue to get into today. First, I want to talk a little bit about what actually happened over the course of this arc, right? Tom, can you give us just real quick what happened in Secret Empire?
Secret Empire, it turned out that Captain America for years had secretly been a Hydra sleeper agent, and he arranged things to take most of his fellow superheroes off the board such that Hydra could take over the nation. But it turns out that the reason Cap was this way had to do with some shenanigans by the Cosmic Cube, the living embodiment of which Kobik, by the end of the story, manifested a second Cap based on her memories of the original Cap, and the two guys punched and hit one another until good Cap came out atop bad Cap.
So, Alanna, can you set up this issue for us?
The Omega?
Yeah, it takes place after one guy got beat up and the other guy did not.
Yes.
So at this point, Hydra Cap is still alive and, around.
He didn't just disappear in a smoke.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately for everyone. So this issue is basically our Steve breaking into the prison where he's being held to kind of get some closure and get some understanding for why this person is who he is, like what he did, why he did it, that kind of thing. And then from there, that's kind of the overall framing device that is them kind of going back and forth, metaphorically punching each other instead of literally punching each other. And then we also see a few of the threads out in the Marvel Universe of things that will, come out of this, and where certain players ended up, where the X-Men ended up, where, Bucky and Clint ended up, which we'll talk about more later, I think.
Cool, yeah.
And so this is really the issue where they get to have the conversation that they didn't have time to have.
And so for those of you out there who, quite like Steve Rogers, have a lot of questions, don't be afraid to ask those questions. On Facebook, on YouTube, get them all to us, and then we will put it to the finest minds at Marvel. So moving forward, I want to kind of talk about this arrangement. Essentially, Nick, you have this villain that is a perversion of everything that Captain America kind of stood for. Can you kind of give us a run of the book? What are these two folks talking about? What are they talking about in this possible situation?
Well, yeah, when they faced off in D.C., they didn't get a real chance to have any kind of conversation. It was just as soon as they saw each other, the fight started. And, the whole world was watching that. So this was really our opportunity to have these two guys be face to face. To have kind of their competing ideologies and value systems face off. This way, as opposed to just throwing punches at each other. So it was really about these two guys measuring each other up, and seeing the ways in which they are in fact very similar, and the ways in which I think they're very different.
One thing that we're going to talk about this a bunch is the idea of the power was given to him, right? It's not like Hydra Cap took it. It's that the Hydra Cap was handed the power, and yes, he clearly maneuvered it. But I wanted to kind of go into that, Nick. What was your approach with that kind of how he got power? That idea that it was just handed to him.
Well, I thought that was a really important thing to emphasize here because whenever you do a story that involves something like the Cosmic Cube. People have a tendency to look at that and just say, well, they're just manipulating reality. But the fact of the matter is here, all Kobik did was change Steve. Everything that everyone else did, they did of their own free will. All of the heroes deciding after Civil War II to not come back together and solve the problems that had caused so many divisions among them, and instead delegating so much power to Steve, that was something that they did of their own free will. Or, the average everyday people of the Marvel Universe making a lot of decisions out of fear, and being willing to give someone like Steve an enormous amount of power to sort of say to those fears. Those are things that everyone did of their own free will. And so what you see Steve here pointing out is, I didn't do those things. I didn't force anyone to do those things. I may not have been honest about who I was, but, these were decisions that people made of their own volition.
And so kind of getting to that reputation of Steve and how that was kind of manipulated, Alanna, how does that kind of character deal with what comes next? Because a core element of this book is like, no, you took my reputation and destroyed it, and I'm kind of fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent there will be some of Steve grappling with the damage that was done, like, because you can talk a big game about how, like, ultimately it was a good thing and people will know not to trust authority figures blindly anymore, but, like, on a personal level it sucks. Like, like little kids don't trust him anymore, even though he's not the one who did those things. Like, he's not the one that they're actually afraid of, but he wears his face. So, and that's not something he can change easily. So, he's got a lot of work to do, kind of. This
panel right here, I love the flinch. It's just such an incredible moment.
Yeah. So he's reaching out to a little kid in the rubble, and the kid recoils because this is the guy who did this to him, basically. Right. So he's going to have a lot of rebuilding to do, a lot of soul searching to do himself to, kind of decide what his path forward is after this traumatic thing that happened to him.
Meg, I want to go out to you on this. Again, we've seen a lot of... Captain America has had some ups and downs, and this really seems like a very significant down in his history when it comes to just how his reputation's just been so sullied. So I guess I'm wondering, where does this kind of factor in the history of this character?
It's actually really, really interesting because, I mean, if you ask someone just kind of in general who Steve's, greatest villain is, you'll get, the Serpent Society, the Red Skull. Those are all, not incorrect answers, but thematically, the biggest enemy and the scariest thing that Cap faces kind of time and time again is his own identity. And so this is kind of a very extreme version of that. Like you'll see, Steve come up against Skrulls that have come up, that have like become him. You'll see Steve come up against clones of himself. You'll see Steve come up against like LMDs, life model decoys, which are like robots. The idea that Steve has to continually prove himself by fighting things that are not him and define himself kind of against things that are the opposite of him. There's like literally a villain in the Marvel Universe called Anti-Cap. It's something that happens a lot. It's something that happens kind of over and over again. And I think Steve is really unique in that he almost needs that, that sort of like butting up against something that is, him but not him. And so I think that this is kind of the ultimate realization of that theme that's been running for, close to like 70 years now, I think.
That's great, yeah. And one thing that has also really come up in this run of Secret Empire is the folks that Steve has mentored. And whether in this issue that's Tudor and Natasha, whether that's the Punisher, whether that's Bucky, which we'll get to. I just kind of wanted your take on, in this issue, we see a lot of people handle what went down in a couple different ways, like the Punisher. How did you kind of perceive that in the light of the characters that have always been around Steve?
Oh, man. So Steve, for as great a guy as he is, he's kind of got this double-sided nature where he invites people to be inspired by him. That's kind of his deal, right? Like, he's this aspirational figure. He's the most aspirational figure maybe in comics. But he has this sort of laundry list of people who went for that aspiration. They were like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be somebody that Steve would be proud of, and are then horribly maimed by the experience. That's not a new thing. So, like you have like Nuke and Frank Castle for some, like to some extent, Rick Jones, Jack Flag. Like there are no shortage of people in the Marvel Universe who shot for Steve as like the stars and then landed in like the void of space and realized that they couldn't breathe, which is a little bit rough. But I think that's something that kind of dealing with that head on is better than not dealing with it because it's a very real theme that happens very, very frequently.
There's a lot of characters that Nick Spencer personally killed. Nick, how do you account for all your crimes of killing Rick Jones and Jack Flag? Come on, I mean, there's a body count here, my friend.
Yeah, we very proudly added to that list that Meg's talking about. It's really true. There is, very few characters in comics have as much collateral damage around them as Steve does, and that is a very interesting part of his legacy. And certainly here we started with Jack Flag, and that was very intentional to kind of echo the original Bucky moment. And I think that finding those ways to touch back on the history of the character throughout was really important to us. In terms of going forward, there are a lot of characters here who put their trust and their faith in Steve, and they're going to be feeling the repercussions of that for a while. And certainly here we checked in on the Punisher, who was one who really followed blindly, and Frank is not a character that gives out trust very easily. Steve is pretty much the only person in the Marvel Universe that he's ever really looked up to, and he's kind of the last vestige of Frank's idealism, and so to have the Punisher pay such a heavy price for that is a big deal.
Tom, I want to talk a little bit more about what happens in this universe next. Punisher, we talked a little about. He's on a one-man campaign against Hydra.
Yes,
nice. Then we also have Natasha, who appears dead, but.
Well, she certainly seems to be dead, but we get a little hint in the Omega that maybe something more is going on, and that's going to play out in a series that will be launching in December, Tales of Suspense, number 100. We cut immediately to number 100, skipping all of the junk issues before that, to go right to the big one, and that'll be a storyline written by Matt Rosenberg, illustrated by Travel Foreman.
This is that cover.
This is the Marco Capetto cover.
I love it.
Yes.
And it's Hawkeye and the Winter Soldier, each in their own way and on their own trajectory, sort of on the trail of Natasha's ghost. Each of them dealing with their own, their own grief and their own feelings, both for her as a person and for her as an institution. This is the
Sorrentino variant.
Wow.
Yeah, Andrea Sorrentino did a beautiful variant.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this sort of weird, almost anti-buddy book as the two of them, come into contact and clash and bounce off of one another as they're both kind of in pursuit of the same thing, which is what's going on. Who is this mysterious person that's taking out old Black Widow enemies, and what's it all about, and what's the mystery that's going on at the center of that? And there is a mystery, and we'll find out all about it.
Yes.
Alanna, you love these characters, I can tell. Hawkeye shirt and Bucky love.
Yes, I'm really, really excited about this book. It's been very hard not to talk about as we've been developing it, because we've been talking about this book, I think, since the issue where Natasha's assassination attempt fails, that we would have sort of a book for Clint and Bucky spinning out of this, where they're trying to figure out like why these mysterious events are happening. Like they've seen her body; she died on national TV.
Yeah.
So who's out killing the people that she wanted killed? Like what's going on? And they both approach it in very different ways. Like you'll see, Bucky doesn't think it could be her. Hawkeye thinks it's definitely her. And partly because Hawkeye needs to believe that. So there's a lot of tension between them as they explore this, trying to figure out what's going on, and they're kind of together by happenstance, but they're also the only people who know what each other's going through. So there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of tension, and it's just going to be a really great, slick espionage book. Travel Foreman's drawing the heck out of it. I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Nice. Meg, you sound a bit excited about it too. Do I have that right?
Mm-hmm. I am, yeah. I'm always excited about new Bucky books, for sure.
Couple loose threads we want to talk about. The new TN thread has kind of come to a close. The mutants no longer have their own country. What does that kind of mean for them moving forward?
Well, they're going to have to send out change of address cards, first of all. But they had a moment where at least some version, maybe not exactly the perfect version of the dream they've always had of a place where they could live and coexist and so forth, was there and has kind of been snatched away again. And so individually, each of the X-Men and the X-Men as groups are going to have to, grapple with what does this what does this mean for the future? Can they go on? Do they still continue to chase the same end goal? Does this change their point of view? It's just another iteration of the man sticking it to the mutants again. They're the guys that more than anybody else in this.
Sentinels, they should know that that's kind of historically loaded.
Yes, they should. I think Beast actually says that in the in the book. Like, that's. But clearly somebody is sending. They're sending a message to the mutants. We don't want you guys here no more. That just means the X-Men and mutant kind in general are kind of back to that eternal place that they're in of being sort of the unwanted outsiders. And having to deal with a world that hates and fears them.
So before we get to the final part of the book, which is, again, the art in this book has been incredible. We've seen a number of spreads in this that are just super eye-popping. We do want to kind of go around the horn and ask folks what their favorite part of this huge all-singing, all-dancing event has been, right? Alanna, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so my favorite part is in Secret Empire 10, when Bucky shrinks down and gets inside the cube and pulls our Steve and Kobik out. Just because working on the Thunderbolt series before this, I have a lot of investment in the Kobik and Bucky relationship. Yeah. And, also the Steve and Bucky relationship, which went through the ringer while Hydra Cap showed up in Thunderbolts and kind of wreaked havoc on Bucky's life a bit. So this, it was kind of a closure for a lot of the things that, I've been working on in the past year. So for me personally, like, that was a moment that I really... I felt very strongly about, and I was like, this is the moment where, it's Bucky reaching out and saying, like, I know it wasn't you. Like, let's go punch Hydra Cap and fix everything.
All nice, warm fuzzies looking back at the plane.
Yeah, it's really nice. So I really like that moment. It made me all warm and toasty inside.
All right. Tom?
So you did a really serious one, and I did the really stupid one.
But it's also really good.
But of course it's really good. It's issue one, that sort of comedic horror moment of Barf throwing up a Captain America lunchbox. Because it's completely gross and ridiculous, and it's a moment that seems like it's just a bit of nonsense at the beginning of this thing to show, he's an Inhuman, and he's got this secret self, and it turns out ultimately to be the key to the heroes turning things around, a bunch of issues later. But it's just Steve McNiven drew it so wonderfully ridiculous and horrific that it's a moment, and the fact that the character came back and was so important, so made all of the right people unhappy and upset. That I couldn't love it more
because
just
it's a
for
fun
that.
medium. At the core of it, comic books are supposed to be a fun medium.
Absolutely.
Where some guy losing the superpower lottery is a core element of the story.
I think we sent that script page to Steve, and he was like, I love drawing this book. This is going to be great. Like, he sent us an email specifically about that. It was wonderful.
Those of you watching, by the way, feel free to tune in, pitch in your favorite moments from the past book. Again, we've had, 10 issues? It's
10 issues,
an incredible run.
Plus the Omega, plus the Zero, and the Free Comic Book Day.
So 13 issues. So if you have a moment that you want to single out, by all means, hit us up on Facebook or on YouTube. Nick, you wrote this shindig. What's your favorite part of it?
I think my favorite part of it was probably the Punisher reveal.
Yeah.
That was, I think, our genuine biggest surprise. That was the thing that nobody saw coming. I really enjoyed seeing the kind of fandom argument about whether or not Frank would do this and why he would do it. We just had a stunning visual of that reveal of Frank by Andrea Sorrentino. That's probably my favorite image of the book.
It looks so good.
I would give a little honorable mention to the Hank Pym dinner party. Dinner party. That was a lot of fun to write.
All right, Meg, what have you got?
Mine is actually, that's perfect because mine is the Hank Pym dinner party.
Yes.
The Pymtron, dinner party wonderland, horror. It sits perfectly at the intersection of horrifying and heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
But it was just really, really engaging. This idea, I'm obsessed with Ultron Pym. I think he's just one of the most horrific characters that has happened in recent years. But in a really engaging and interesting way. And I'm a huge sucker for, kind of that old vintage original Avengers nostalgia. And so this was a horror movie version of that. This was the worst timeline version of, those characters coming back together. And no one is who they say they are, and everyone's kind of a little off kilter. I loved it. I thought that was a little, like, it was just the right amount of, like, you know, gut punchy that it stuck with me, and it's still sticking with me.
Yeah, it's such a good moment. I like it's like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It's like my favorite thing. But my actual favorite thing was the comeback of one Bucky Barnes. He jumps out of the ocean,
very nice,
right past his buddy Hawkeye, and then says, "I have a plan and stuff."
Like
and then he has a plan and
sphere
stuff.
of water.
Yeah, he's nice and wet. So wet Bucky Barnes. Walt Hickman's favorite moment of the Secret Empire series.
Good choice.
I want to get to the final kind of arc of this book, because a core theme, Nick, that you've kind of hit on a lot is that it's not just that Captain America made the world fascist; is that the world elected to make itself fascist with Captain America at its head. Is that about a decent reading of this?
Yeah, you know, I mean, what Steve really points out in the Omega is, you know, that from now on, everybody's going to know that a huge part of the population was happy to go along with this. That they were actually, you know, really comfortable with it. That they had Captain America as the proponent of it. That gave them some cover. But in terms of what he was asking them to do, you know, they went along with it pretty eagerly, and you know, that's going to be a really troubling legacy in the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, and because even in the last issue, Tom, there was the Inhumans' house had gotten vandalized, and then people like the bad guys aren't going away in this, which feels like a super ambitious choice. Like usually you'd see them like poof gone, or they become.
Well, again, we talk about when we do most of these events. One of the things that everybody likes to hear about, particularly the fans, is like, well, what's changed? What's different in the Marvel Universe? And this is maybe a little more subtle than things we've done in the past, but it's definitely an acknowledgement of the fact that there's a sentiment among the people of the Marvel Universe that maybe doesn't like things the way it is and would rather it be a different way. And that's an unsettling settlement. It's certainly something that, good Steve, even apart from the question of whatever his involvement is, really has to grapple with himself. That the very people he's out there to represent and serve maybe don't subscribe to all of the same ideals that he does, or all of them in the same way that he does. It's a very uncomfortable sort of a thing, but it makes for a very interesting landscape to tell stories in.
Yeah, this really doesn't feel like a happy ending, to be honest.
Right. Well,
on some level,
it's a very. I mean,
the beast got unleashed, and he's still there.
It's a very downbeat at the end. He pretty much, Steve will pretty much says, "I'm not going away," and there are people out there that absolutely believe in what I subscribe to, and absolutely believe that. The world was theirs, and the Allies used the Cosmic Cube to take it away from them, and for years they've been living a lie, and they're going to get back to their truth. And that's a much more potent motivation for Hydra and for those people than just sort of vaguely wanting to be, fascist bad guys because it's fun.
Yeah. Like, actually, the last pages in this book are really hammering that home again when, there's a prisoner, secure the prisoner. And Alanna, do you want to kind of walk us through the last kind of notes of this book?
Yeah, so at the very end of this, we see, an alarm goes off and Steve pieces out, and a bunch of security guys come in to kind of corral Steve-ul and restrain him again. And one of the guards who goes forward to, restrain him whispers Hail Hydra in his ear. So he's in a prison where there are people who are still loyal to Hydra. So he's there for now, I guess. Maybe not for much longer if things go his way. But yeah, so it's an ominous beat.
Yeah. Nick, what were you going for when you ended the story this way? What kind of moral do you want readers to kind of take away from the fact that fascism does not appear to have died?
Yeah, well, it's been a really interesting experience because when we had the previous issue come out and we ended on that big rousing happy ending with all the heroes kind of standing there cheering, we heard from a lot of folks that just said, "Oh, that's it, it's all done," and now we've kind of dropped the Omega on them and they see that no, actually, these problems are still very much in front of them, and that Hydra Steve is still there and Hydra is in some ways stronger than ever. And I felt like it was very important when we were dealing with this kind of enemy, when we were, very much doing a story about fascism and about the threat of fascism. I felt like it was very important to not end it saying, well, that's it, we've beaten it and it's gone forever. I wanted to emphasize that this is the kind of fight that you have to continue fighting, and that it's the kind of thing that will never be easily resolved, and that you have to be constantly vigilant about. And that's really what Steve realizes over the course of this conversation.
Meg, any last thoughts on where this book kind of sits in the pantheon and where this takes the character moving forward?
Oh man, I think it's going to be really interesting because, as much as, like I said before, this is a recurring theme, this idea that like Steve has to kind of butt up against his own identity. It's never been this literal before. And it's never really left this big of a scar. I mean, I think the closest thing I can possibly think of is the Cap of the 50s, who is this guy who kind of was like later retconned into being like a big fan of Steve's, who kind of like lost his mind and changed his name and like did the facial surgery to like become like looking like Steve Rogers. It was this whole crazy thing where he became this sort of evil Captain America, and he never really went away. But he wasn't Steve. He was a guy named William who was just kind of like cracked and lost his mind under the pressure. And now we have that same sort of thing but this is actually Steve. This is not some crazy fan. This is not, someone who kind of, wanted to become Captain America. This is a person who was Captain America from the start. And I think that's higher stakes than any of these identity stories have had before. And I think it's interesting, but it's also a lot of pressure. I think that there's the next, couple years for Captain America are going to be really, really formative, depending on how this, the plot with Hydra Cap really shakes out and where he ends up, kind of sitting at the end of the day.
Well, certainly, if I ended a comic book, if we ended an issue with Steve Rogers trapped in a prison, your expectation would be, next issue he's going to find a way to quickly get himself out of the prison.
Right. Sure.
And this guy is no different.
Yeah.
he's no less skilled or capable or confident or able than our Steve is. So the notion that he's going to sit on the sidelines for any longer than he needs to or wants to is sort of laughable. He's Captain America. You're not going to keep him trapped in a hole in the ground.
So we are coming to the end of our live stream, at the end of Secret Empire. I do need to disclose that both the Walt Disney Company owns both Marvel Entertainment as well as ABC News and 538. But yeah, so moving forward, again, so the book is on the shelves now, Secret Empire Omega. It's a button on the whole summer's worth of stuff. And then coming up, we have Alanna,
Tales of Suspense.
Tales of Suspense. When can we see that on shelves?
That is in December.
That is in December.
Yes, and it will run, I think, 5 issues?
5 issues.
Yeah. We're really looking forward to it.
And then before that, and it's really only another week or two, is Generations Captain America. Generation Sam Wilson, Steve Rogers, which is Nick's last Captain America story that jumps off from the Vanishing Point beat that was in issue 10, and is kind of also brings the Generations line of books to a close. So it's a nice end cap for all the stuff that Nick has written on the character, and a good jumping off point into the future. And then at the very end of the month, the big Marvel Legacy #1 that kind of kicks off our next cycle of stories in a huge way.
All right, Nick, you almost ready to say goodbye to this character, or how's that last book looking?
It's tough, I mean, I'm really excited for Generations. I'm very happy that we're ending on a story that's very much focused on Sam, and is really all about a big moment of discovery and change for him. I think Sam has been the heart and soul of our story from the start. So it feels good to be ending it on that. And it's bittersweet. This has been a fantastic experience for me, and just a huge honor to get to write these characters. So so I'm excited for that to be out there and to kind of put the punctuation mark on it. All right.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in today. Thank you everyone for watching, by the way. This has been a ton of fun to cover this story. It's been a super exciting run. Meg Downey, Nick Spencer, Tom Brevoort, Alanna Smith, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It's been a heck of a show. All right, I've been Walt Hickey. This has been Inside Marvel with ABC News Digital. Thank you very much for watching.